Welcome back, Visions fans. Ready Player Will here. Today, this is the Cherise character review, brand new wind unit released to global this week. We're going to look at the character overview, base and total stat analysis, a little bit more about some of her statistical metrics, the report card, which is really the summation of all of that, followed by the class of job overview, where there are some interesting nuances to know about her, where I don't think she's necessarily as straightforward as some of the other units you're used to seeing. The TMR review, my general thoughts, and then some general Esper and weapon optimization talking points. So let's get started. Again, as I mentioned, brand new wind unit. They've given her the Hunter, Strider, and Gunner subjobs. The Hunter main job is not unique to her. That is also the same job as Eliza, and there's actually a fair amount of similarities between those two characters. Obviously, a little comical at this point to see another missile-oriented unit given to the wind cast. They already seem pretty stacked in that regard, and she's actually pretty good because of that, though, so can't really complain. Now, she does equip bows, hats, cloths, and accessories with a move of 3 and a jump of 2 as a 70 cost unit, and that's actually extremely important when you contextualize Cherise's value in the game. For a 70 cost unit, she's actually quite good. And again, Eliza's a 90 cost unit. They're not terribly dissimilar from each other. Eliza does have some things that obviously gives her that rating. Anyway, that's a side conversation. From a resistance standpoint, some good, some bad. So the negatives, minus 10% to slash. That's the glaring weakness, but then again, you're a ranged unit. She's squishy enough as it is anyway, so that one's slightly correctable, not the end of the world. Minus 5% to strike, not worried about that. But the other one's really not that bad. 15% to missile is nice, 10% to pierce, 10% to magic, so relatively well-rounded in terms of some of the other ones. From an ailment perspective, this is debatable whether or not she's a 97 faith unit. I don't think she is personally, but I don't think it would hurt if you went for 70 or 80s. That being said, the resistances are 50% to confusion and toad, which is not great, but Halloween Lucia, so you don't need to worry about a trust stone for that, and 10% to stop. Now, as we look at the base stats overall, so HP, very, 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 very low. One of the worst in the game. That being said, that is right where most of the sniper-oriented characters are, though. So although it's low, definitely not out of ordinary for the profile of what those range units typically have for HP. It's just she's not going to be very bulky HP-wise, totally fine. Now, from an attack perspective, kind of the same idea here. Very low on the base attack stat, but again, not terribly out of the ordinary from where a lot of the other missile units are. So although contextually from a DPS perspective, she's lower, compared to other missile units, she's right where she needs to be. From an agility standpoint, her base agility actually is quite high. Now, that being said, she actually ends up being of average speed, so don't let this mislead you. Even with the vision cards, it actually doesn't give her the same upside you think it might be, but very high base agility. From a dexterity perspective, definitely skews higher as well. We see that on the Hunter jobs a little bit, where they go more for critical oriented builds to amplify their damage. And to be fair, most missile units do that. They rely on crit damage to make up for some of that lower attack stat. And finally, the luck is a basically strictly average, so nothing too crazy there from a base stat perspective. So when we kind of translate those charts into this one right here, the agility obviously is a very strong shining point compared to other URs for what they give for the base. The dexterity is another shining star here, you know, fairly above average. But the board, a couple things change here. So they definitely jip her on the agility they give her on the board, significantly so that she actually doesn't end up being above average fast that the base agility might lead you to believe. They do give her a ton of dexterity on the board too, though, and if we're looking at the breakdown of this, they only give her 2 agility. Most characters get anywhere from 6 to 8 on average, so 2 is very low, and the dexterity 93 is immensely high. So they definitely make up for some of the base dexterity by giving her some love on the board. But overall, these total stats are right in line with what you would see from most missile-oriented units, so nothing too worrisome. But when we do look at some of the other ones here, the crit hit and crit avoid. So crit hit definitely skews higher because of that innate dexterity rate. She does also have some percentage nodes on the board as well. So I think it's about 17% extra crit rate she gets from her board. The crit avoid, the luck is kind of right in the average, so she does end up right around average as well, just to at least give some context to it. From an accuracy perspective, definitely an accurate unit. Innately, without even any passive, she is on the higher side end of the spectrum here, but she does have an additional passive that will give her more accuracy. Definitely bumps her to that very top tier range. Now we look at the evasion perspective, not an evade unit. Don't even attempt it, very, very low. That's okay, most missile units don't have that capability. But finally, when we get to the report card. So speaking frankly, definitely a D overall on the effective HP side of things. She is exceptionally low effective HP, but it's, again, in line with other missile units, so not terribly worrisome. She does have 6 innate spirit, no defense though. So she does skew a little bit stronger against the magical side of things, particularly with the 10% magic resistance, but her health is low enough that it's not really all that impactful. Now, primary stat perspective, I'm going C-, but again, this is very misleading because it doesn't correlate to necessarily damage. It's more just talking about the stat itself and how you can increase it. The attack definitely skews lower, but you have to keep in mind the defense penetrations, the missile resistance penetrations, which she does have plenty of access to. And overall, archers tend to trade a lot of their damage for extra utility on their abilities, and she's obviously different from that perspective. Now, agility-wise, ends up straight average despite that very high base agility. She's got no passives to increase it, and even though you can add those, vision cards to buff it up and whatnot, the way the game rounds it, she doesn't actually end up being that much faster than characters on the broad scheme of UR units, so something to keep in mind at least. From an accuracy perspective, I'm going A- here. Great accuracy potential, particularly with the aim build of her bow, which we'll see at the very end here. She does not have any guaranteed hit in her kit though, something Eliza does have, so maybe a little extra feather in Eliza's cap, but I wouldn't worry too much about the accuracy if you know how to use it. From an evasion perspective, D, not an evade unit. Movement, I'm going B just because of the jump of 2. We have seen on a handful of times here these missile units that have jump of 2 and how it helps them get to higher points in the map to increase their range potential. So very, very nice upside there for her. From a passive perspective, I'm going a straight C here. They're good passives for her, but they are super limiting. They're very straightforward. Doesn't really do a lot to alter the different builds you can give her. So definitely very average from that perspective. The counter abilities, I am going A- here. She does have a great unique counter that Eliza also has, but you don't see as often, and we'll get to that on the counter page. The overall kit, though, I am going B+. Overall excellent build flexibility via the subjobs. There's a handful of different ways you can make her opening and rotation go. She does have some interesting pieces of utility on her kits. Overall, does skew a little bit higher, but all in all, ends up being a B unit. Excellent potential, but that's largely skewed just by the strength of wind in general and their missile-oriented nature at this point, where she does fit in perfectly with that. So if wind wasn't as strong and well-rounded as it was, she probably would not get as much benefit from it, but she fits in exactly with what wind typically wants to do nowadays. Now we look at the passive abilities. Again, very, very average. Hunter's Eye is range +1. The Natural Instincts is really the best one here. This is both the accuracy 25 and the defense penetration of 40. Always have this one on. Combat Ready is interesting. She's already like an AP monster, though, in her AP management, so you don't really need this one. That's really more for PvE, I would think. Concentrate's the other really good one, in my opinion, where you want that range +2. On some maps, maybe not all, though. Again, every missile user, you have to look at the map for context, whether or not you want that extra range or not, but Concentrate's a nice one to have. And Missile Mastery, if you're just trying to increase a little bit of that damage output. So, again, really average ones. Nothing, not that it's a bad thing. It's perfect for her, but doesn't really scale across a variety of metas and doesn't really do a lot to necessarily change her profile build, if you will. Where some characters you can add agility, some have defense or spirit, some have HP, some have move altering abilities, things like that nature. She's got none of it. Now, from the counter perspective, Wind Snare is actually a very interesting one. Eliza has the same ability for ice, but Eliza also has reflex, which is why you predominantly see that instead. But Wind Snare is a very good ability. It is a preemptive counter, 30% chance to proc, really, really great range on it. It's both a wind resistance in parallel of 25% and a missile resistance in parallel of 25%. Now, Danger Sense and Counter Shot are okay ones, but really not geared for what she wants to do. But Wind Snare, definite thumbs up. Now, as we transition to the main job, the buffs, there is only one buff on the main job, and it's Pursuit Techniques. It's basically an upgrade to Eliza's tracking techniques that a lot of us have seen, where it's an agility buff of 25% for herself and allies, increases the missile resistance by 25% to herself and allies, also increases her attack by 40% and her reaction block rate potential by 50%, so it reduces the potential of enemy countering, and then also restores AP of 20. So all in all, if you cut the TP in half to 13 and add 20, she gets 33 AP off this ability. Obviously, potentially even more if you add acquired AP to her kit. But this is one of those abilities where it is an AoE and she'll run in circles casting it, so you do have to be very careful about how she uses this buff. Now, when it comes to the main job, a lot of different abilities to choose from here. Maddening Arrow is a 25% chance to Berserk. Suppressive Volley has an upgrade here where it's decreased CT by 15, decreases enemy range by 1 for 3 turns. Very interesting effect there. And decreases enemy missile attack by 40 for 3 turns. So Suppressive Volley has a very interesting upgrade here that Eliza's regular one does not. Triple Flight is the triple hit ability that does get an extra modifier here if the enemy has haste or berserk, and if it's a critical hit, decreases AP. Armor Piercing Arrow is probably one you'll see the most. The defense penetration of 40, but it's also a defense break of 25. And then finally, Counterman Break Shot is the one that's unique to her. It's a 25% missile resistance in peril, also reduces the enemy counter chance by 100 for 3 turns. If we're looking at the range of these abilities, though, they're all the same in that they are a range height of 5, and they all, because it's a bow, have that trajectory arc. So there's some things to keep in mind here in terms of like AI prioritization, which is why I say it might be kind of tricky to get things right. In terms of which ability she'll probably prefer the most, obviously Suppressive Volley is the pick if there's enemies in a group the game will always prioritize the most damage done in a turn, but otherwise, Armor Piercing Arrow is probably the go-to, just because it has both the penetration and the defense break. And then it's really kind of a toss-up between Triple Flight and Countermand Break Shot, Triple Flight really being the toss-up if the enemy has haste or berserk. And so it's subjective, based upon the enemy's missile resistance, whether or not the game decides it's more damage to do the Triple Flight or more damage to do Countermand Break Shot. I think Triple Flight is better for the chaining potential, given that it's a triple hit here. I think the decreased AP is a little more of a valuable piece of utility than just the missile resistance in peril and the reduced counter chance. And I say that because her counter ability also has missile resistance in peril, and she's got enough potential penetration from a missile resistance perspective that I don't know if this in peril is that big of a difference maker for her, unless you're running a very heavy missile-oriented team, Sadali more the merrier, who don't also have access to those imperils, in which case obviously it's better for the team. So definitely something to think about here when you're gearing the AI. Now we look at the Subjob here. Nose for the Hunt is a great accuracy ability while also increasing her range by 1. Clean Piercer is more of a tank busting kind of attack. Debatable whether you want to have it on or off. It does have a cast time, but as we mentioned, a great tank busting potential with the defense penetration of 50 and the missile resistance penetration of 50 for just that turn, in addition to the higher modifier of 185%. Now, the Strider Subjob, this one's a smidge more niche, and I say that just from the perspective that it's really more for the Spirit Ward if you want to change up what she potentially does for buffs. As you saw, there's only one buff on the main job, so this is potential for another one, depending upon the enemy that you're seeing. There is some interesting extra potential here with the Constricting Cleave and the Frost Axe, where both of these have slow and then Frostbite, and Frost Axe has decreased healing power, so, obviously you want to keep her at arm's length if possible. She's very squishy. These are a little shorter range and you'd be comfortable casting, so not recommending you go for them, but it's good that she has access to these. Definitely can help in some certain scenarios. And they're slash-oriented attacks, so if you are building more of a slash-oriented win team, you can kind of build her into that profile as well, but again, that is really niche. Now, the final job, the Gunner Subjob, this is probably one of my other personal favorites in addition to the main Subjob, if only because I do like the access to other potential kinds of buffs here. Aimed Fire is an underratedly good one for wind, where not a lot of wind units have access to aimed fire, so I do like this one potentially. Council can be another potentially good one depending upon how you're building for crit rate. Vital Shot is really the one that I like a lot though, where obviously in the main job you have an ability that has an increased modifier if the enemy is hasted, but this ability is not only a knockback by 1 square, but it also dispels AP restore and dispels the haste, so I do like this one a lot, just to potentially throw into the rotation of things. But again, very subjective how you make this work. Because these are all teammate oriented buffs, if you don't get it right, she'll end up running in circles and maybe not get the optimal efficiency that you're looking for. Now the limit break, this is a good limit break. Cross-shaped AoE is a giant dispel, also dispel haste, and also reduces her hate by 5, so a very nice piece of her potential survivability where people won't target her. So definite thumbs up here for the extra dispel. Now look at the Mastery ability. She has innately 10% missile resistance penetration, certainly nice, but also a decrease of AP consumption of 15%. So when we go back to the main job here, if you're looking at all these AP abilities, you actually want to decrease them by 15% to get a true cost. So she does have some really good AP management potential. Now the TMR itself, this is a definite interesting TMR from the perspective that it does have some great stats with the 5 agility here, the 6 defense, the 10 accuracy. The ability is a double cast. It's very good though from the 20% AP consumption down. But more than that, the 40% dexterity increase. Now, just to what that actually means in layman's terms, 40% dexterity is about 8 to 10% accuracy. It's about an extra 20% crit hit chance. And obviously, characters that have high dexterity values in their abilities also will do slightly more damage because of it. So this is an interesting missile unit TMR for sure, particularly when you consider she doesn't have many buffs on her own main job. So if you are only going with 1 buff or so, the TMR option is a good option. Now, for my general thoughts overall, quirky counter missile unit, and actually, except against ice, obviously her being a wind unit has a very strong innate weakness there, but the main buff gives missile resistance 25% to her and allies. The suppressive volley gives range -1 to enemies and decreases missile attack of 40. So it's kind of interesting counterplay there when you look at the other missile oriented jobs and the other elements, but again, kind of niche, but it is unique to her, so that's interesting to say the least. The Summer Jaden Vision card actually adds a very unique balance potential here, where she can get up to 65% missile resistance penetration, 10 from the Mastery, 20 from the weapon, as we'll see, and 35 from the Vision card. The Slash Res 10 on it fixes her weakness, gets her to 0, and the acquired AP 50% makes her an AP monster, where she's already got 15% decreased AP consumption, 20% after a critical hit with the bow equipped, and then obviously you can do things to have extra acquired AP up as well. This Vision card certainly makes it so that she could just spam attacks quite easily. Now, the aim fire buff, as I mentioned, is valuable to wind missile, which is lacking. Even Summer Jaden, it's really only Corwell, as far as I can tell, that has aimed fire for the wind unit. So when it comes to increasing your teammates' range, I actually think this is a really nice piece of value to put in here, where when it comes to More the Merrier, Sodali, Summer Jaden, those characters that have missile-oriented attacks in their kit, she can now extend their range +1. Very, very valuable. Now, as I mentioned, probably a difficult AI to get right. It's a little matchup specific to which offensive abilities are best, as we saw trying to prioritize things. The buff potential also makes things a little bit muddy, where she might end up running in circles if you don't do things properly with the agility, but, that's really subjective to whoever's using her. And then finally, debatable high faith or not, Berserk, Slow, and Frostbite are on the Subjob. I say no, personally. I'd keep her at 50, but I could see a place where you maybe want to increase it a little bit. She's going to get one shot by most things anyway. And the 97 Faith, even if she doesn't die, also amplifies the healing received, so again, always a double-edged sword. Now we look at the Esper Synergies. The ones you really want to maximize here are Wind Attack, Human Killer, Missile Attack. Everything else is really based upon matchup for what you want to look for resistances, but for recommended Espers, obviously, Chaos Odin and regular Odin are always the de facto best for DPS. The agility, the man killer, the different kind of resist, the accuracy, you name it, they basically have it covered. But there are a handful of other very, very good ones. I do like Chaos Tetrasulfate a lot. This one does have missile resistance, accuracy, and wind attack, so makes her hyper accurate. Helps her take some of those missile duos a little bit better too. I also like Golden Armament as well, where it's got the slash resistance to make her negative weakness not so negative. Also has wind attack and defense as well, so you can bulk her up a little bit. I do think regular Tetrasulfate is another good one here. Wind attack, missile attack, and wind resistance. So if you see any mirror matchups, this one will certainly help a lot. And then finally, the Chocobo Esper is also one of the better missile ones, where you get missile attack up on a variety of nodes. And there's obviously varying different levels of agility between these Espers, so all of them have their own time and place. Now we look at the weapon optimization. They released the Wolf bow this week, and no doubt it is by far the best weapon for her. I do think the +6 Platinum Rod is very competitive, but I think for Cherise, this one still edges things out just a little bit here. And when you talk about which build is best, I really think all of them potentially could be. The critical one you may not get the most upside from, just because she already has a good enough critical rate, but the Assault and Aim both have great stats on them. The 28 accuracy on the Aim build is definitely noteworthy. For Cherise, it gives her missile attack 15, accuracy of 15, and decreases AP consumption of 20% for one turn if you critically hit an enemy. So a lot of great potential benefits there for her, but it also gives a missile attack resistance penetration of 20, which gives her 30 overall with the mastery ability. Yes, Platinum Bow does have higher attack and the defense penetration, so maybe a little bit better for tank busting potentially, but I don't think there's that much of a difference, and overall I like this one just a little bit better for her. But that's the Cherise character review in a nutshell. Again, interesting character, released just because of where Wind currently is as a element and what they're strong at, that she fits in perfectly. That 70 cost designation is really her biggest upside, though, that when you do consider cost-limited Guild Wars and limited Guild Wars, definitely value there. I don't think there's a massive difference between Eliza and Cherise from that 90 to 70 cost distinction. I really think it's Eliza's 125 ability that Dispels, Protect, and Shell, which is what elevates her there, and her Limit Break probably has a little more uniqueness with the Imperil and the Move Down +1, but Cherise is not far off there. I think she's a definite upgrade to Corwell and Lucia, so if you enjoy using Wind Missile, she is definitely a thumbs up from that perspective. But that's it for now. Thanks for watching, everybody. I'll talk to you all soon.